Well, welcome, Jo.
Hi, Helen. Thank you for inviting me today.
It's really good to have you, and thank you so much for spending the time to come and talk to our members about groundwork. Who or what is groundwork?
Oh, that's such a good question, because so many people, even though we've had a presence in North Wales for approaching 30 years, people still either don't really know who we are, or they might know about us through one project they've engaged with. So we are part of the Groundwork Federation of Trusts, of which there are many and various across the whole of the UK. At the moment, there are just two in Wales. So there's Groundwork Wales, who cover the southern half of the country, and ourselves, Groundwork North Wales, who cover the other half. So although that sounds like we might be sort of a subsidiary of Groundwork Wales, we are two distinctly separate trusts with our own kind of priorities. But generally, we all exist to help people to create a better situation for themselves in life, often with a kind of outdoorsy, environmental kind of slant. So we have lots of different projects, whether that's employability or youth engagement or education more broadly. And then there are the projects that I look after for the northern half of the country, which is all about fuel poverty and affordable warmth. So basically helping people to keep warm for less.
Brilliant. And that's what you're going to share with us.
That's what we're talking about today. Yes.
Yeah, so how long have you been doing this particular work?
So I've been in post now for just about 3 years. So 3 weeks, a couple of weeks ago. So previously, I had a sort of similar role working with businesses to improve their kind of environmental credentials and their sustainability and that kind of thing. But then after a bit of a kind of career, let's just say a bit of a sidestep, saw this Groundwork advertised and thought, that sounds like the job for me. So I am 3 years later.
Brilliant. And I've known you for probably a couple of years now, and I know you're really enthusiastic about what you do, and I know that
absolutely
you're really keen that people understand what savings they potentially can make, what grants is available.
Absolutely, because it can seem like a bit of a minefield,
yeah,
or generally don't know what support's out there, so don't know how to access that. And obviously at the moment, lots of people's situations have changed as a result of the pandemic. So more people than ever are becoming eligible for sources of support that they absolutely wouldn't know existed. Because if you had to access them before, why would you know they were out there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah. So therefore, following on from that, Jo, what would you say is the priority issue that people should be aware of this winter when they're looking at their energy bills?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for me, absolutely the number one priority for lots of people this year, because obviously we've all been spending lots more time at home, seen their financial circumstances change. So whether that's been perhaps they've had a period of furlough, or so their wages have gone down, or they maybe unfortunately have been, say, on a 0 hours contract and haven't been able to go to work, or been made redundant. So lots of different reasons why people's income has gone down, but also at the same time, as I said, because we've been spending more time at home, or because maybe, people have got maybe childcare commitments, or they've been shielding or something like that. So yeah, so at the same time as incomes have gone down, obviously sometimes expenditure has gone the other way. So yeah, people are finding that it's quite difficult to cope and keep on top of bills. So absolutely, the number one thing I would suggest at this time of the year is that people look at whether their energy company, their energy provider, whether they participate in something called the Warm Home Discount Scheme, which is a scheme that has been operating for a number of years in the UK, that all of the larger energy companies have an obligation to offer. So some people qualify for that scheme automatically, and the scheme basically gives a £140 rebate off the cost of your winter fuel bills. That is essentially, it's tied at the moment largely to your electricity supplier, because lots of people, particularly in Wales, don't have access to mains gas, so have alternative forms of heating. So everyone has to look at their electricity supplier to find out if they're eligible for support. So some people will qualify for that £140 automatically because they're in receipt of something called pension credits. If that's the case, then they'll get a letter from the DWP saying, here's your warm home discount, and then that will come as either perhaps a check in the post or a voucher. If people are on a prepayment meter, particularly, that's what happens. Or it could be that they just see it as a £140 credit on their winter bill. So, and then that is paid at some point between kind of January and March of next year.
Okay.
So that's the time when, if people are still paying in the sort of quite traditional way of in receipt of a quarterly bill, maybe, that's when people are getting their often most expensive bill of the year. So that's when it's really helpful.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's the people who qualify for it automatically. Then for everybody else, there is something called the broader group eligibility.
Right.
There is a set of guidelines for the energy industry about how their customers can become eligible for support under that scheme, but they do all tend to be a little bit different. So it's absolutely worth looking at your particular supplier, whether that's, say, Scottish Power or EDF or E.ON or British Gas. Have a look at their website and just see what their eligibility criteria are, because some of them will say you have to be in receipt of a means tested benefit to qualify. So something like universal credit or ESA, JSA, that kind of thing. And that's why I think lots of people are becoming eligible for the schemes at the moment, because more people, sadly, now find themselves in a position where they're having to universal credit.
Yeah.
So absolutely have a look. Now, some of the suppliers, that's enough. You just have to be on a means tested benefit and you can apply. For some of them, it has to be you're on a means tested benefit and there is some other, what they call vulnerability within the household.
So maybe a disability or something like that?
Yeah, it could be a disability, or it could be that there's a child under 5 in the home, or there's a child under 18 but still in full-time education and training. So yeah, lots of different reasons. Or it could be some of the suppliers will say, okay, we recognise that you don't have to be on a means tested benefit to be struggling to keep up with your payments. So they'll say, okay, so you just have to be on a low income. And then that typically is defined as under £16,190 a year or thereabouts. So if your household income is less than about £1,200 a month, you may qualify for your scheme. But absolutely, it's worth either just, if you can, if you're happy to do that, if you have the resources and the skills to do it, just pop on your energy supplier's website, have a look and see what they say. Alternatively, maybe give your supplier a ring and just ask the question. So, am I eligible? Do you offer the warm home discount? Am I eligible for it? How do I apply? So quite often they'll be able to process that information over the phone. So quite straightforward to do. The one thing I would say is if you think you might fall into any of those categories that we just talked about, do it sooner rather than later, because the schemes are all kind of time bound or time sensitive. So they're only open for quite a small window of time to get your application in. So some of the energy companies will say, right, okay, our scheme is open specifically in October for applications, let's say. Or it might be that they'll say, right, okay, our scheme is open until such point as we've had enough applicants to spend this pot of money that we've put on one side for it. So absolutely, if your energy supplier's scheme is open, apply now, because I wouldn't want anybody to miss out on that £140 rebate by just missing it by perhaps a day. So absolutely.
Okay, so that's the warm home energy discount.
Yeah, so warm home discount scheme. Great scheme. And as I say, more people than ever are finding that they qualify for it. So absolutely check that out. The one kind of caveat that I would say with that, and it's important, is it's a bit random to be saying, well, you need to be thinking about your winter bills in July. So lots of the energy suppliers, there is this kind of cut-off point where you have to have been with your current energy supplier since July in order potentially to qualify for this year's warm home discount. So that's not to say if you have switched recently, don't bother applying, because obviously I think the energy industry has recognised that this year is like no other year we've ever experienced. And some of them are kind of being a little bit more flexible about their approach. So absolutely, first and foremost, approach your current supplier and just ask the question.
Sure. And if somebody's listening to this, it may be that you have a relative or a neighbour that who, even if you're not
Absolutely.
entitled to it, it could be somebody else. So to make them aware of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, because we all know somebody at the moment who is really struggling, for whom their situation has changed in the last 7-8 months or whatever. Absolutely let people know.
That actually links to another question. You've talked about people struggling to pay their energy bills, and just very generally, what would your advice be to people if they are struggling to pay their energy bills? Should they contact their suppliers sooner rather than later?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I know it's easier said than done, and it is really easy to think, you know, in the global scale of things, everything feels a bit overwhelming and nobody really knows where to start with any of it. But I would say, please, 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 if you're struggling, absolutely get in contact with your energy supplier. Ofgem, so the body that regulates the energy industry, have obviously recognised that this year, as I say, is unprecedented. So there are guidelines that they've put in place for all of the energy companies to adhere to in terms of how they treat customers who are struggling. So absolutely, don't, again, easier said than done. Don't feel embarrassed. Don't feel awkward. There will be somebody in a similar position out there to you. You will not be the first person that your energy company has heard from this year who's saying, look, I'm struggling to pay. So don't let that situation spiral out of control. So it may be that they can look at, you know, not necessarily kind of freezing any debt that you've got into, but just looking at ways for how to make that a little bit more manageable. Right. So they might be able to sort of freeze your payment, almost like a little payment holiday. But they need to know that you're struggling.
Sure.
Don't just go, I can't afford to pay this, so I'm going to cancel the direct debit.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're on a prepayment meter, I'm just not going to top up. That's where things spiral out of control really, really, really quickly. So absolutely get in contact. So
communicate with your supplier as soon as possible.
Absolutely. Because it could just be something as really simple as, I mean, it's something that we're going to kind of come on to. It's talking about switching.
Yeah.
It may be something really simple, and also it's a good piece of advice anyway, but so all of the energy companies have an obligation under their license to operate in the UK. They have an obligation to tell you on your bill or your annual statement, if you're a prepayment customer, they have to tell you whether or not you are on their cheapest tariff.
Okay.
Currently, there is no obligation to actually put you on that cheaper tariff. So it may well be, if you make that first step, which feels like a massive, really brave step to make, open up that conversation with your energy supplier and say, look, can you do something for me? Is there a cheaper deal that you can put me on? Because currently, I know I find, funnily enough, I was speaking to a lady just this week who said, I'm really struggling, can't get any sense out of my energy company. My bills are super high. I can't really afford to keep on top of them. I usually end up sitting in my bedroom wrapped in a blanket because I'm too scared to put the heating on.
Right.
So I said, well, okay, I'm happy to speak to your supplier on your behalf, but you will need to get in contact with them first to give me permission to speak on your behalf. So she did that. And then she rang me back a couple of hours later. She said, oh, I'm so glad that you sort of encouraged me to ring, because actually they've realized that my direct debit was set far too high for my actual consumption. Right. So be another, you know, that can be another one. If you're thinking, oh my goodness me, I can't afford £150 this month, but actually for the amount of usage that you have, you should only be paying maybe £90 a month. And that's a huge amount of money to chop off. Or it could be that, you know, that was the direct debit that your energy company set when you first went with them as their kind of best guess as to how much they thought you were going to spend. But actually, in reality, you've used a lot less. So they can, reduce. So just ring, again, anybody, ring your supplier and just say, is there a better deal you can put me on? And also ask them to review your current direct debit and just see whether there is anything they can do to reduce that. So loads of ways to make things better, but absolutely don't struggle and don't feel like you're the only person that is in this situation currently, because trust me, you absolutely are not.
No, that's a really good thing to say, actually, Jo, because I think people often feel when they're struggling that it's unique to them.
Absolutely.
Would you suggest it's a good idea if you do phone up a company that you make a note of the name of the person you've spoken to?
Absolutely, yes.
So you've got record of that too.
And then you have got a little note of, well, I spoke to so on this date, and they were super helpful. And then at least then you can at least go back and say, well, to that person again. Now, obviously, at the moment, things are a little bit odd, and it can be quite difficult to get hold of anybody at all at your energy company. And I know some of the bigger companies are engaging in the services of like a call answering service. So sometimes it does take a little bit of persistence. And that's the other thing I'd say. Don't give up at the first attempt. If you don't get the answer that you want, don't be afraid to try again.
Okay. So, that's brilliant advice. Thank you, Jo. And you mentioned there as well, switching your energy supplier. Now that, so scary, so difficult.
Absolutely. You know what? And it really, really needn't be. I think sort of historically, people have been a little bit kind of worried about, oh my goodness me, what if when I switch, there's going to be a period of days on end where I'll have no gas or electricity.
Yeah.
Or, oh, in order to do that, and seriously, these are all questions that I've genuinely been asked. Oh, are they going to kind of come along and like dig up my garden so they can change the pipework over? No, it's not like that. It works quite seamlessly in the background. So it's really quite straightforward. And that sort of ties in with what we've just been saying. I think it's really important that people understand the deal that they are currently on. So these are just the key things that you need to know in order to be able to do a switch. The first one, I hope for most people, is fairly straightforward. Where do you live? It's a useful thing. Because because the pricing, I didn't realize genuinely until quite recently, is that often the energy company's pricing is quite sort of postcode specific. You don't necessarily, just because you're with EDF doesn't mean that you're paying the same price as somebody who lives in, I don't know, Newcastle, or the same price as somebody who lives in Cornwall. So yeah, so make sure you know where you live is always good. And then make sure you understand what deal you're currently on. So things like, how do you pay? Do you pay by prepayment meter? Do you pay by direct debit? Do you pay on receipt of a monthly or a quarterly bill? Or do you pay by fuel direct, which is that your payments for your gas and electricity come off your benefits at source? So loads of ways of paying. Some of those more affordable than others, but it all depends on what you define as what's best for you, really, in terms of the best option. So yeah, first of all, understand how you like to pay. Understand as well whether your current deal has is it a fixed term? So are you tied into a contract until, let's say, April next year? If that's the case, are there any early exit fees? Are you going to get penalised? So sometimes that can be sort of up to about £30 or £35 per fuel. So that's something that's important to kind of understand about your current contract. So those are really and also you need to have a feel for how much gas and electricity you use in a year. And again, this is all information that has to be on your annual statement or your bills regularly. If you get a bill regularly, there's something called a tariff information label or something of that kind of ilk. So that will tell you all those things that you need to know. And then it will also tell you, again, whether you're on your energy supplier's cheapest tariff currently. So that doesn't necessarily mean, although they have to tell you, and as I said, there's no obligation for them to put you on that tariff. That doesn't necessarily mean that that is the absolute cheapest tariff out there, that you couldn't get yourself a better deal by moving to a different supplier. But notwithstanding what I said earlier on about make sure you don't inadvertently do yourself out of your £140 warm home discount.
So you
switching at the wrong time of the year. So it's all good things to be aware of. And then in terms of actually doing the switch, there are lots of switching sites out there. In terms of knowing which ones are the best, there's something called the Ofgem Confidence Code. So if you're looking at websites like maybe Energy Helpline or YouSwitch or I think Money Supermarket, all of these subscribe to this Ofgem Confidence Code. So that gives you the kind of guarantee that you are going to get fair advice. It is going to be simple to switch. There is a process in place for, heaven forbid, if something goes wrong. So there'll be like a little kind of round logo that says Ofgem Confidence Code on it. So look out for that. And then you know that the switching service you're using is reputable and regulated in some way. So there are lots out there. Of course, I feel duty bound to talk about Groundwork Switch. So we have our own switching service called Groundwork Switch.
I was going to ask you about that, actually.
There you go. So yeah, so that is all done through Energy Helpline, which is one of the Ofgem approved switching sites. So yes, so every switch that gets done through that site, yes, you know, in the interest of openness and transparency, we get a little bit of payback per switch. However, that is all spent, all the proceeds from that are spent funding or helping to fund our projects at a local level. So if you quite like the idea of knowing that you supported a local project that might be working with vulnerable teenagers or helping adults to get the confidence and skills that they need to go back to work, or the new skills they need to maybe switch career, you know, as a sort of post-COVID response, please consider groundworkswitch.org.uk when you're looking to do your next switch. So that's my shameless marketing over.
Okay, you're allowed that, Jo. Can I just
oh, thanks.
Because not everybody feels comfortable using the internet, or maybe can't access the internet.
Absolutely, yeah.
Number?
So there is, so for, now I have to say, I don't know the phone number for Groundwork Switch off the top of my head, but it does indeed have an 0800 number that you can ring up, and you can do that on the phone. It's not a problem at all. Although, and there will always be sources of support in your local community that will be able to kind of help you with it. So yeah, have a look out for, particularly obviously in where we are in the northern half of the country. We can provide support through our involvement in something called LEAP. So that's the Local Energy Advice Partnership. There are other LEAP partners dotted about all over the UK. So if you're watching this video from outside Wales, look up LEAP. And then in other parts of the country, always the Citizens Advice Bureau, with an at the end, are always a really good source of support and guidance for all things kind of energy related. And actually, that's something that I did mean to mention. If you're just interested in a sort of impartial kind of look at what's happening with the energy companies in terms of, and it's something again that I get asked all the time is, well, who's the best company to go with? It depends on, you know, what best means for you. So every quarter, Citizens Advice at a kind of national policy level, they do a review of all of the energy companies that are currently operating in the UK. So if you look on, I think it's the Citizens Advice, I made a note of this and I've forgotten it again. So Citizens Advice supplier performance comparison, something like that, then that will give you a completely impartial view, because you can't do the switch through there. They score them out of 5 for things like ease of switching, ease of customer service, number of complaints to a third party, so how often somebody complains to Ofgem about that supplier, and a couple of other categories. So if you, and then they give them an overall rating out of 5. So if you want to know which supplier gets complained about the least, because customer service is something that's really important to me, or getting an accurate bill at least once every 12 months is something that's super important to me, you can have a look and judge for yourself, or which kind of company would I like to switch to. So that's a useful place to have a look.
Brilliant, thank you, Jo.
But then in terms of then doing the switch, it's really easy. You just feed in that information or talk to the person on the other end of the phone, and yeah, they'll pretty quickly be able to identify whether there is a cheaper tariff out there. But obviously do bear in mind, if you know that your current supplier is part of the warm home discount scheme and you've applied for it this year, don't switch now because you'll miss out. But if they are, or you don't meet their criteria, and you can find yourself something that's going to save you £150 a year, do the switch.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe not. If you know you're going to get penalised for coming out of a deal too soon, don't switch to one that isn't going to save you at least as much as those penalty fees. I was
going to say, because you did talk about penalty fees earlier, so yeah, that's really important to take that into account as well. But
absolutely.
There's the Citizens Advice Bureau people can go to, and maybe when people have watched this, if they want to get in touch with TPAS Cymru, I can get the 0800 number from you.
Absolutely. Yes, Groundwork. Definitely.
One very quick question that I was asked about the other day, actually, by a tenant, and it's about a register for people who perhaps are vulnerable. Is it called the Priority Services?
It is, yes. Oh, good knowledge, Helen. I'm impressed. So yeah, absolutely. So the Priority Services Register, again, is something that all of the energy companies offer. And also the, for want of a better word, the sort of infrastructure providers. So the people that look after the electricity cables and the gas pipes and the water pipes, they all offer this scheme called the Priority Services Register. And it's a word that I don't like using, but it offers support for sort of vulnerable customers.
Yes.
Anyone that just feels that they might need a little bit of support.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that can be for all sorts of different reasons. So basically what the Priority Services Register seeks to do is to provide a bit of extra help in the event of either a planned or emergency outage of any of the utilities. So that might be, let's say you have some medical equipment at home that relies on electricity. So that could be, I don't know, maybe a bed or a stair lift or a mobility scooter that needs charging to allow you to get out and about, or you have some medication that you need to keep in the fridge, something like that, then absolutely pop yourself on the Priority Services Register. Completely free to do, super easy to do. Again, you can either phone up and get yourself popped on it. We've partnered up in North Wales with Scottish Power Energy Networks. So not the Scottish Power that people pay their bills to, Scottish Power Networks, who look after the pipes and so on and so forth. And they have what is rather grandly called a data sharing agreement. So once you register with them, they then sort of proliferate the information to kind of where it needs to go. So, you know, they can't necessarily promise to get you reconnected sooner rather than later, but they will at least check that if anyone's on the Priority Services Register and the power goes out, they will check that you are okay.
Right.
Also know that you need essential medical equipment. I believe that sometimes they will look at, can we get you an emergency backup generator or that kind of thing. But it's not just related to, it's not just specifically to people with who are living with a chronic health condition or a disability, or a kind of long-term thing. So it could be that just literally anyone over pension age can pop themselves on there. Anyone with a young child at home can pop themselves on there. And for this year, they've got another category as well for young adults living independently can pop themselves on there, because that can be quite a confusing, scary time. Power's gone out, what do I do now? If you're not used to being in that situation, what happens? And the other thing that I think is quite new is that it doesn't have to be a permanent thing. So if you feel for whatever reason, you could do with a bit of temporary support from that, knowing that you've got that peace of mind of somebody's going to check on you, or maybe bring you a warm drink or whatever. If you, let's say you've maybe had a period of being hospitalized, or you've been quite poor, and you just feel, you know what, I just want a little bit of reassurance that if the gas goes off, I'm not going to be freezing cold, or if the water, you know, I've got access to bottled water and that kind of thing. So I think it's a really, really important scheme. And it's really easy to get signed up for that. And I'm happy, again, if people want, I can share the details with you, Helen, and then you can, if people want them, you can send them out.
That's brilliant. Jo, thank you so much. I feel that there are lots and lots of questions I'd like to ask you, and I think maybe we're going to have to try and arrange a second one of these.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm always happy as well, you know, if people, I'm probably kind of doing your job for you or stuff. You know, if people have got questions, get in touch with Helen, or again, I'm quite happy to pass my details on. And if we start seeing sort of recurrent themes in the questions, absolutely, by all means, we can do maybe a live Q&A.
Sure, that would be really good.
That would be great.
Okay.
Yeah, do a live stream. Look at us being all 21st century. Yeah.
Jo, thank you so much. It's been really good to see you again, and thank you for sharing
and you too.
knowledge. And
very welcome.
Soon. Thanks, Jo.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.